Welcome everybody who's joined us this evening, and most especially Chitra Banerjee, who has joined us from Houston. It's early for her, it's morning. So good morning to you, Chitra. And hi, Mandira. Thank you for joining us. You're in Delhi.
Hi.
Chitra's newest book, The Last Queen, finds resonance, especially in the Punjab and in the Majha. So it's only fitting that we have this discussion at Majha House in Amritsar. The story of Rani Jindan Kaur, the last queen of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, is something that we have all heard of and we know a little bit of. But seeing her in this book and the bravery, her heroism, her complete, going against all odds, her wonderful role as a woman in love, as a wife, as a mother, and how she tries to protect the interests of her son, Dalip Singh, against palace intrigues as well as all the intrigues of the British. Because she became regent when her son was barely about 6 years old when he lost his father. Chitra's novel is exciting. It's a love story. It's a story of a bond between a mother and a son. And above all, like all of her books, it's a story of a strong, indomitable woman and somebody who stays completely unbroken despite all the trials and tragedies in her life. And the way she projects Jinda's agency is especially stunning because it is at a period when women really didn't have a voice. Uh, Chitra Banerjee Devakaruni always draws huge crowds, and listening to her and reading her is always a treat. She is an award winning, best selling author, poet, activist, and teacher of creative writing. Her books have been translated into 29 languages, and several of them have been made into films and plays. And as she was telling us, this particular book also has already been optioned, so we should see it on the screen soon. Her last novel, The Forest of Enchantment, is a retelling of the Ramayana in Sita's voice. Mandira Nair, who is going to be here doing the conversation with Chitra, is a senior special correspondent with The Week with over 16 years of journalism experience. She writes on history and culture and foreign policy. And I think her obsession with history has taken her across India and beyond. She's passionately committed to the values of press freedom and integrity and peace at our borders. She carries forward the torch lit by her illustrious grandfather, Kuldeep Nair. So, welcome to both of you. Before I hand over to Mandira, there is something I must say because it's important to say it at this point as we go forward. I'd like us all to pause and to pray today and every day for all of those people, all of our countrymen and women facing the most appalling challenges as they watch their loved ones battle for their lives. It's a very, very difficult time to take your mind off from what we are seeing, from the scenes that we are seeing on social media, on TV screens, and even in our phones of what is happening in hospitals across the country. And in fact, 2 days ago, when we were corresponding, Chitra asked me this very question. She said, should we continue with this session at such a time? Because it seems insensitive to talk about books when so many people are suffering. But I answered to her, and this is what I want to say to everybody today, is that we must continue to do the work that we do because otherwise we fall into this complete pit of darkness and despondency. We must speak of the present crisis, but we must also talk about the things that give us joy and that give us hope in these dark times. And books and stimulating conversations are that very precious thing. Thank you, and over to you now, Mandira.
Good evening. Good morning, Chitra. Um, you know, I wanted to add to what Preeti said. I think it is a very somber time. It's a really difficult time for all of us. We're all battling or dealing with some sort of crisis of somebody we know. The crisis COVID has never hit as at home as much as it is done now. And while we're sort of sitting here and sort of discussing something else, I know that we've sort of all taken time to put aside our personal crisis or whatever's happening to sort of talk about books or words. And, for someone who spends her time sort of figuring out whether the right word is this thing, that's all we have really, words that sort of hurt, but also words that heal. And I think at this point of time, I mean, I would really, I would like to thank everybody who's sort of listening out there. But I also wanted to ask Chitra because this book, while it's a departure from what her other books have been, she's always written about strong women. She's written about mythology. She's written about Sita and Draupadi. This is also the first time she's sort of getting into the sort of the region of history. It's her first historical fiction novel, and it was also in other ways her first novel really in lockdown, in a time of COVID, in a time of pandemic. It's also like this thing. So I wanted to talk to her about how she managed to produce this novel at a point of time when we find it really difficult to sort of focus on anything else. So yeah, um, could welcome, and could you talk about really that too?
Thank you. Thank you. I want to say hello to everyone who is here watching us, listening to us. I want to thank all of you, all the organizers for inviting me. And I just want to send out a word of prayer and hope and holding on at this difficult time. Although physically I'm far away, almost every friend I know has been affected. Almost every family member has been affected by this COVID crisis. So my heart is with all of you in India. My prayers are with all of you. And, by divine grace, we will get through it. So I just wanted to say that, and also to echo that, for me, books have always been a comfort in times of crisis. They have given me, just like sleep gives the body the rest that we need. I think books give the mind a similar rest and ability to go into another world and relax, gain our strength, and come back feeling stronger, feeling refreshed. So I'm certainly hoping that maybe our talk today will do that for people. And your question is, how did I write this book during lockdown? It was an experience like none other. It was, first of all, I was so shocked when the pandemic happened. And again, the pandemic was at that point raging in the United States. It was really bad. In, uh, just like it was in India, I knew so many friends who were affected. It's very hard to keep the mind on anything at all. And yet I found that which I thought of as a great problem also in some ways became a help. And that was really kind of interesting, because isn't that what Rani Jindan's life teaches us, that when she is in great difficulty, she draws upon an inner strength and she is able to do what maybe if things were okay all the time, she would not have. She would never have discovered that strength in herself. So I think COVID taught me some important things, which is one of which is a lesson really from the Forest of Enchantments, from Sita's life. When Sita is banished to the forest for no fault of her own, she's heavily pregnant and she's in distress, she's in crisis, and she pauses and she says, what can I do about this? She doesn't waste time talking about or thinking about all the things she can't do, all the ways in which she has been wronged. Oh, this is unfair. Why should the world be like this? She just says, I have 2 children to bring up. That's what I'm going to do. And I think I really internalized that lesson as I was writing The Last Queen, because I couldn't go places. I couldn't go and visit For example, I had really wanted to visit Spence's Hotel in Kolkata,
Yeah.
where after many years, Rani Jindan is reunited very movingly with her son, who has been taken away from her by the British when he was taken away when he was a little boy. So I really wanted to go and see some of those places, at Chunar Fort, where she was so cruelly imprisoned by the British, but I couldn't. So I said, okay, I will do what I can. And luckily, I had been able to gather all my books. So all my print resources were with me. And I said, okay, I will just have to look at pictures on the internet, photos or old paintings of all these times and places. And actually, that turned out to be a very good thing. It allowed me to use my imagination, where perhaps if I'd gone to, where these things are now, they would be very different. And that my mind would be imprinted with their current day reality. But here I was really able to get into their original reality. I spent hours just, studying the map of the Lahore Killa, where Rani Jindan spent really some of the most important and powerful times of her life, and things like that. I looked at a lot of old paintings of Ranjit Singh's court, and even like what were the women wearing. It was actually it allowed me to explore a dimension which perhaps I wouldn't have explored as deeply. And I really started looking on the internet for resources of the times. Like what had the travel writers written? What were the letters going back and forth? And because I couldn't do anything else, I really focused on this book, and I got it written in probably a shorter amount of time than if it had been my regular life, where I would have been distracted by many things. But right now there was no distraction. It was that or worrying about COVID. And I said, let me, clearly this was a much preferable option.
Well, I'm certainly impressed, because I find it really difficult to do my day job and sort of churn out a story every day, but then, which is meaningful with everything, and you can't get off Twitter. But I really wanted to talk to you really about also how you encountered Rani Jindan. You have, while she is in the popular imagination in Punjab, very few people really know about how essentially, you've talked about this. I think most people talk about her husband, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, as well as Dalip Singh. There is very little about the woman that was important to both of them, a woman who carried on the legacy of Ranjit Singh, who was far ahead of her time, gave up Parda, becomes appeals to the Khalsa army, who refuses to do sati. There was a lot of dimension, and a woman who I think that Dalhousie refers to at some point of time, the only manly presence in Punjab. So I wanted to ask you about really how you encountered it. I think you have a really wonderful story about how you encountered her story and why you felt it was so important to tell it, because in some ways it was deliberately left out by the British. So could you talk about discovering her, how you did it, and why you think it was completely left out or deliberately, why she's not practically even a footnote in history?
Yes, I think of all the stories of why I have come to write different books, this is really, for me, it was one of the most striking and surprising, because I have to say, I didn't know anything about Rani Jindan. I knew, as you said, I knew a lot about Maharaja Ranjit Singh. I knew quite a bit about Dalip Singh because he's such a tragic figure, and his kingdom is taken away, Kohinoor is taken away, he himself is taken away to England. But I didn't know anything, and I have to be ashamed to say that I never thought. I didn't think much about the woman who would have been his mother, the woman who was Maharaja Ranjit Singh's wife. But this is what happened. So I was in Kolkata visiting a book festival, the Kolkata Literary Meet, and I had walked into the open air auditorium a few minutes ahead of my talk, and William Dalrymple was talking about his book, The Kohinoor. And just as I walked in, and this must be like, I don't know, divine ordinance or something, he projected onto the screen the painting of Maharani Jindan, which was ordered by her son many years into her life, almost towards the end of her life, when she is reunited with him in England. And that became the cover of my book. And it's on the wall behind me because I just love that painting so much. Yes, that is the painting. So, but when I saw that painting, it wasn't even intellectual. All of those thoughts came later. I was just struck by her face. There was so much character in her face, and this is towards the end of her life. She's not well. Later, I found out she was in very bad health, but she has such strength in her face. She has such stoicism. I said to myself, this is a woman who has been through so much and come out on the other end. You know, she's kind of been through the fire and come out stronger. And I just want to know more about her. And as I started doing research, I recognized all the things that you said, that she was quite an amazing woman. She came from a very humble background. She was the daughter of basically the dog trainer in the Killa. And she comes to Maharaja Ranjit Singh's notice, and she has such personality, apart from her beauty, that he doesn't make her into a concubine. He says, you are going to be my queen. And later he says, you will be my last queen because, you know, you have filled my heart. And I put that into my book because I thought that was such a romantic, beautiful, romantic moment. But as you said, after that, she becomes a widow. Then she, in an amazing series of events, Dalip Singh becomes the new king, and she is determined. She is determined that she is not going to let other people rule his life. So that's when motherhood really brings out the strength in her. She dispenses with the veil, very unusual in the Lahore court at that time. She comes out of the zenana, and she continues doing all the things that you mentioned. So I think I really wanted to rescue her from this obscurity. And as you mentioned, I think the reason she is so obscure, apart from a tendency in our history and perhaps world history, but certainly in Indian history to often, and in mythology, to often push the women to the sidelines. So I wanted to redo that and bring her right to the center. Now, in her case, there is another reason, which is that because she was so powerful and she was so beloved by the people. In fact, even when she is in prison, she has no money, no power. She's guarded heavily. Dalhousie is like, we've got to destroy her reputation because just her reputation makes people rise up on her behalf. And so they create this huge and truly disgusting smear campaign. They call her the Messalina of the Punjab. They say that, oh, look at this woman. She is completely dissolute. She has no morals. She's sleeping with everybody in the court. You know, some of the things I read, it was really very upsetting and very kind of sickening that they would kind of try to destroy her in that way, which is a very particular patriarchal way of destroying a woman's reputation.
So,
so I felt I had to do something about all of that.
Hoping that a lot of people, of course. And I think that is what is wonderful about it, because I think at some level, you know, you have this ability to do this, to sort of go into the inward world of what women are, right? So you sort of explore their thoughts and their things, their, you know, and what I felt was, you know, so she talks about that. And I think it's important to remember, you know, you said that there was a smear campaign, but there's also an attempt to sort of, you know, sort of keep her out, right? You know, apart from the fact that she is in Punjab and she's sort of this thing, this is a woman, as you've written, she is a woman who refuses to be defeated by the circumstances that she's been handed over. She rises from the last queen of Ranjit Singh, and I want to talk to you about the women of Ranjit Singh a bit later. But you know, and then she becomes the first regent. She commands the army. She also, after you know, there is this very powerful you quote from a letter, and she wrote letters. I think you discover them, right? Where she
Her letters were quite amazing. Yes, I'm sorry, you're breaking up a little bit.
About being separated from her son, if I remember.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm sorry. My voice, my video sometimes goes off. But could you really talk about the aspects, the empty spaces in her life that you fill in? You know, the kind of historical material you had. You know, her letters. You write about this wonderful letter when she vanishes from the fort, Chunagar fort, right, in near Varanasi, to sort of by magic and disappears and travels 800 kilometers to Nepal. She's donating everything, sort of keeping on the rebel army, sort of delighting in the fact that 1857 happens. And someone who sort of goes to Britain and then gets Maharaja Dalip Singh, who's a wonderful experiment of, in some ways, a brown, a black prince that the British try and mold into British ideology, into a British, into a, you know, into British aristocracy, okay, and then sort of defeats that and gets him to become Sikh again. So my question really is, what historical evidence did you really have in terms of the letters that she wrote? Could you talk about that?
Yeah.
And can we also?
Yeah, luckily the letters, yes, luckily the letters, or at least parts of the letters, are available. They are in some of the history books. Also, you know, she wrote, she was very smart, because when she is in prison, she has apparently no resources, but her biggest resource is people love her. So her master of spies is able to get people to come and be in prison. You know, they're disguised as like sweeper women, and these were all women. So she has this whole group of spies helping her, and they're all women, which is so wonderful, because women could get to places that men couldn't. So, you know, a seamstress, a sweeper, these were her spies, and she would give copies of these letters, because she was writing to Dalhousie, she was writing to Queen Victoria. It was like those letters just disappeared. They were not going to send those letters anywhere. So, but she got them published in the Punjab papers of the day, Punjab newspapers. And that was wonderful, because so now we have records of these letters. And yes, her power is so wonderful. And I really think you were so right. Not only, and she was, of course, the wonderful thing about her is she had this little, you know, she had this spirit, like when she's leaving Chunar Fort and she has to go, right? She has to go really quickly out of this fort. A seamstress has come, she has taken her place. But she takes the time to write a letter to the warden of Chunar Fort, says, yeah, you imprisoned me, you did all these terrible things to me, and look, I'm escaping, you can't keep me in here. So I love that part, you know, that kind of spirit. Yes. And then, of course, you brought up something so important, which is the cultural colonization of Dalip Singh, which is one example of a much larger problem that is part of the dark British heritage that was left in India, this cultural colonization of our people, where we were made to feel inferior. And that affected a lot of things for a long time. But she is able to reverse that with her son.
With her son. So I wanted to talk to you about, you know, you've written about the women in Maharaja Ranjit. I think at some point of time, you've mentioned there about 32, there could be even more. But you also talk about her confidant and somebody who's very close to her, Mangla, who actually is also has a very remarkable story. Slave girl, and then she becomes a keeper of the royal seal. So I wanted to talk to you about that aspect, about the aspect of women. I hope you can hear me because it keeps telling me that the aspect of women in this whole story. You know, you keep your zenana is full of intrigue, but it's also full of the kind of support that she gets. It's Mahi, who's later her helper there, or Mangla, who's actually a historical figure. How Guddan, the wife who does sati. I wanted to talk to you about that, retrieving these women out. Could you talk about Ranjit Singh and his women, including his mother-in-law, Sada Kaur, and how you sort of how what that says about him having these powerful women, and how you retrieve the voices of these women in your book?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. You know, the world of women has always been of interest to me. And of course, I generally have a major woman character that I'm focusing on, but I want to look at all the women in her life who have influenced her positively and negatively. And that is something I try to do in Forest of Enchantments as well with Sita. It is not just the story of Sita, and she acknowledges it herself. She says, without your stories, and she's talking about characters like her sister Urmila or Surpanakha or even Ravan's wife Mandodari. And she says, without your stories, my story would not be complete. And I really believe that a woman's story is made up also of the stories of all the women around her, those who support her and those who are antagonistic towards her. That's certainly the case with Rani Jindan. And I love the character of Mangla. When I came across her, I was like, yes, I can see this will be really important, because Mangla comes into her life pretty early. She's just a new bride when Mangla comes into her life. And Mangla is very important. She's very protective of Jinda, and she really guides her. She teaches her a lot about zenana, intrigue, and all of those things. And later she continues to be in her life. She is 100%, her follower, and she's 100% like loving her and protecting her and loyal to her. So she was a great character. But I mean, she has her faults, as does Rani Jindan, and I wanted to show that. I wanted to show the character in a realistic way. So at a certain point, Mangla will fall in love with Jauhar, the brother of Rani. Jauhar, he is bad news from day one when he comes to court. Yes. And yet Rani Jindan loves him because he was her protector all through her very difficult childhood, and she owes him a lot. And Mangla falls in love with him, so she can't even really advise Jinda as she did in all other things.
She's ruled by her heart rather than her mind.
Yes. And then you talked about Rani Guddan. She was very important to Rani Jinda's life. She also taught her a lot. She was a friendly influence in the zenana, where Rani Jinda has a lot of enemies, as you might imagine, being the newest. Not only is she the newest of the queens of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, she is beautiful. She comes from a very lowly background, and she becomes very powerful. He likes her very much. So there's a lot of opposition to her. Yeah. And that was actually kind of fun to write about, all those zenana intrigues and how Jinda gets over them, how she's able to overcome and win over them. So, but one wonderful thing about Maharaja Ranjit Singh is he always treats her with great respect, and he honors her intellect. He appreciates her intellect, and he tells her a lot of things about how the kingdom is run. When he sees that she's interested in it, he's really delighted. And I would say that this comes out of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's childhood and young days, because he loved his mother. He was influenced by his mother. His father died when he was very young. So he was used to the idea of strong women being a part of politics. And of course, his mother-in-law, Sada Kaur. She is just an amazing, she's just an amazing character. I mean, I love her. She really made him into a king, and he never forgot it, even though due to political reasons, he had to imprison her. That was always like a big thorn in his heart. And although Maharani Jindan never gets to meet Sada Kaur, she's dead by then, she becomes a real presence in her mind. And in fact, at a moment of great crisis, when during the first Anglo-Sikh War, the Khalsa army has been betrayed by these terrible generals. And I hope we'll get to talk about that, because that's like a pattern that happened in British India over and over and over. There's a big lesson in it for us today. But so the Khalsa army is falling apart. They've come to her, they're angry. They're like, we have no food. You have sent us to our deaths, and they're about to rebel. And she remembers Sada Kaur, and she kind of draws on her strength, and she exhorts the army. She speaks to the army, and she actually shames them by saying, okay, why don't you guys just stay in Lahore? Just give me a horse, give me some weapons. I will go to I will go. And she takes off her petticoats and she throws them out at them and says, here, you wear these clothes and give me your clothes instead. So, Sada Kaur is a big influence in Maharani Jindan's life. So isn't that wonderful? The stories of strong women help other women to become strong. And that is one of my real hopes in writing these books, is that as all readers, but especially women, read about these women who had such difficult lives and yet lived them with grace, lived them with courage, managed to really make something of their lives, managed to live lives of dignity and never gave up. They won or they lost. That's beside the point. We don't control these outcomes, but they lived their lives with indomitable will and dignity. And my whole hope is that they will inspire us. They certainly inspire me as I write their story. I hope they will inspire readers as they read these books.
So I think that's what what you do with the books is that women have they have agency, of course, but they also are flawed. And I would like to talk to you about that. You could have, Rani Jindan's life swings between the rebel queen and, the mother of Khalsa, sort of person, revered woman. And on the other hand, she is, she's as this very promiscuous. There's also the same element within the court, so she plays this card of being, you talk about Jawahar, we talk about weakness for him, but there is a certain aspect of being probably the most capable woman to lead this sort of torch bearer of Ranjit Singh vision, if in a way I could say, but yet having to negotiate this in a relatively male world. And I would like you to talk about that, the aspect of her being a strategist like Sada Kaur, navigate that in a relatively male world. And what does this thing, as well as her being a flow lover. And she's accused of having more than one lover. You think there is an aspect of their allegation of her having an affair, and Dalip Singh not being her son too. So could you talk about that? The easiest, navigating the male's world, and how women are often just, or let's say capable women are often reduced to aspects of sexuality or being sexual-based things.
Yeah, those were both really difficult challenges for Maharani Jindan, because exactly what you said happened. She was too strong. She wouldn't, if she had just stayed in the zenana and allowed the courtiers to use Dalip Singh as a puppet, they would have loved her. They would have said wonderful things about her. Oh, wonderful mother, whatever, whatever. But she refused. And in refusing, she became their enemy. Um, and, so, and she also, one of the things that she really refused to do was, at that point, the court was getting very divided. The Sikhs against the Hindus, against the Muslims, which it never was in Maharaja Ranjit Singh's day. And she tried very hard to change that around. So she gave a lot of, power to non-Sikhs, and that did not make the Sikh courtiers happy at all. They were like, come on, this is our country, this is our court. But she was like, no, the best person has to be given the best positions so that the kingdom will be strong. So they didn't like any of that. They didn't like the fact that she took off her veil. Now the Khalsa army loved her, but even the Khalsa army at a certain point, they call her mother of the Khalsa, but at a certain point, they want to arrange her marriage. They were like, okay, you're a young woman. We understand that you want to have a family, but why don't you just let us pick you a nice Sikh general for you to marry? We'll even create a list and let you choose from the list. And she's like, no, because you are right, she is a flawed character, right? So she's a human. I should say she's a human character. I hope I've shown her in all her humanity. She does fall in love with Raja Lal Singh, who is Hindu. And they have an affair. She tries to keep it as, discreet as possible, but nothing is discreet. Nothing is a secret in the Killa. Everybody gets
As
to.
they say, ishq or mushk.
There you go. There you go. So, and she refuses, she's caught between several things: love for her son, love for Punjab, love for Raja Lal Singh, and sisterly love for Jawahar. And they all are pulling her in different directions, right? And she has to navigate this very difficult course in between them. So you can see that her challenges are great, and sometimes she makes mistakes. I think her biggest mistake really comes out of her love for her brother, Jawahar Singh, because he should have been sent away from court like day one. She should have seen that he was only trouble. He antagonized all the courtiers, and he did some really bad things, including killing one of the sons of Maharaja Ranjit Singh.
Right? Maharaja Ranjit Singh.
So he should have been sent away, but she couldn't. She loved him. He was her brother, the only family she had left.
But I think that's what's wonderful about this. I mean, I also think that it puts you back, and I think a lot of women, and whether they are successful or not, have to navigate these things, these pulls and tugs of family. And, it's something you talk about, whether it is, all your women characters have that, where you have the reality, and women are meant to be peacemakers, sort of ambition, where you sort of you sort of keep everyone happy, where you sort of this, and that I think is part of the whole aspect of how what the challenges that Jinda faces. So,
yes, because that's an additional challenge on her, right? Maharaja Ranjit Singh was never expected to do all that. And his world was totally different. He could have as many concubines as he wanted. He could drink as much as he wanted.
Exactly.
In fact, people were like, wow, look at this king, this lion of Punjab. Look how he lives. And for her, the rules are completely different. And she is expected. Maharaja Ranjit Singh never worried about family loyalty. He told all his wives, none of your family are coming to Lahore. They are just not. I'm not going to deal with all of that mess. And it was okay with everyone that he was so firm. One could even say almost harsh, because he put his kingdom ahead of everything. And Jinda just can't. Her son is as important to her her brother is as important to her. Her family loyalties are as important to her. She's caught in that bind in which many of us as women are caught. How to balance these sometimes
Find ourselves caught.
irreconcilable, right? Irreconcilable differences
Yeah,
between even our
completely.
married
Where you are,
family and
where
our
if
child family, you know, our birth family.
exactly where it's difficult to navigate, when this thing where hurt and you know where hurt becomes such a powerful weapon for anybody either to use it against women or to sort of keep them in a particular this thing. So I think that's very well done, where you know you sort of this thing. I also wanted to talk to you about Rani Jinda and the aspects. So of course she does, you know, she echoes in Punjab, and she's not the first one to look at the you know, the army, you know, who does the same thing, where she sort of tells the Khalsa army that, you know, you know, are you man or a woman? Because, you know, I'm going to give me this thing, wear these churis and you're this thing. So there is that aspect. But I also wanted to talk to you about how this echoes within the NRI community. So if you look at it, you know, when Rani Jinda's earrings go to get sold, I think they sold, it's bought by Devinder Kaur, Devinder Toor, who is one of the largest private collectors of Sikh artifacts. And I wanted to talk to you about that, the aspect of Sikh pride that happens and how it's sort of finding a resonance overseas in India, where people are sort of looking at Jinda's story and wanting to claim it at their own and seeing it as pride. Because I read this piece about the Rebel Queen, which I think you talked about seeing, this wonderful movie about her, sponsored again by an NRI Sikh, and it's written. The review is written by a writer in BBC who talks about the fact that Jinda's story gives her control over all the narrative, the South Asian narratives of women always being either, you know, sort of being victims of dowry or of other things. And this story sort of gives her back the pride of coming from India, which and having very powerful women figures. So could you talk about the myth or the resonance that Rani Jinda has of people with Sikhs abroad? And have you got a reaction from them, especially a lot of them in America?
Yes. So I agree with all of the above, that there is the Sikh community abroad is actually very wonderful. The Sikh community in England has particularly been very wonderful in championing Rani Jinda and her story. And of course, Dalip Singh also. He is still such a presence. And, you know, his daughter, Sophia, she became very important as a suffragette. And she actually is the one who finally manages to bring the ashes of Maharani Jinda and put it in the Samadhi of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, which she had always wanted. So their story, I think, really touched the heart of the Sikh community all over the world. And the book is not yet out in the US, but I have received so many queries and so many comments from Sikh readers saying, we can't wait. We really want to see this woman brought back to life in some ways, and in a complex way. I think the overseas community in some ways is very open to looking at these other aspects of Jinda's life, which would have been considered, you know, not so good. The fact that she had a lover, the fact that she, you know, she was headstrong, she was stubborn, she lost her temper, that those things are not seen as faults. They're just seen as, wow, look at this strong woman, we claim her and we want to be proud of what she achieved. They are particularly proud of, and they're very aware of how she changes Maharaja Dalip Singh's life around. Because when she meets him after so many years, he's been completely brainwashed by the British. He loves Queen Victoria. She's like his idol. He doesn't see because he was so little when he went to England, or when he was put in charge of a British guardian, Lord and Lady Logan, who were nice enough people, but they completely brainwashed him. They culturally colonized him. They gave him British values and, you know, the Christian religion, and said that this is so much better than your own heritage. And so Maharani Jinda has an uphill battle, but she manages to change his mind around. She manages to make him see what his heritage was, and she gives him back pride in his heritage. And so in some ways, she does that for the Sikh community abroad as well. She reminds them of their amazing, wonderful heritage. No matter where they are, that heritage, those strengths are with them always. You know, you can be in India, or you can be out of India, but you can carry that with you. She was also a very devout Sikh. And so I think she brings back to Dalip Singh that love of the wonderful teachings, let's say, of Guru Nanak Ji. And, you know, I think that's also very, very inspiring for the Sikh community all over the world. I think, yeah. And as you know, that after her death, Dalip Singh will reconvert. He will become a Sikh again.
Yeah.
And I think it was completely 100% his mother's influence that makes him love his heritage, his religion, who he really is. And he's going to fight for his rights all his life. Tragically, he will not win because the British Empire, that machinery is just too strong. But he is going to fight. And that's kind of the final lesson, I think, of both Maharani Jinda and Dalip Singh, that winning is not in our hands, but resisting is certainly in our hands. And that is a victory of a very deep and true kind.
So I think that's wonderful.
I'm sorry, you're frozen.
In some ways, that's what we're doing. We're resisting, right? Sorry, I'm sorry. Can you not hear me? Yeah. So we're resisting. I think in some ways, her resistance against the British being more than what she was. She refused to be a tag. I think in some ways, we're also resisting this disease. That's sort of it. That we refuse to be bowed down by this. But could I ask you to do a reading? Because I know what my favorite part is, but I would really like to know what is yours. And I was wondering if you would be willing to sing, because I think it would be wonderful to hear what would you.
Thank you. I will read. And then after I read, I want to hear what is your favorite part. I'm going to start from the very beginning of the book, which is a prologue. The beginning of the book is not the beginning of Jinda's life. That will be chapter 1, when she's growing up in Gurjanwala. But this will be the moment when she realizes that Maharaja Ranjit Singh is about to die. And she has always thought of him. She knows that he's been in bad health, but you know, in the way in which we are sometimes illogical when we love someone, she has not faced until this moment the fact that he is probably going to die. And so this is that moment. And it's Lahore, 1839. Jinda hasn't slept for 2 nights now, waiting by the sickbed of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, along with his other wives. They've recited the Guru Granth Sahib until their throats are raw. Birth and death are subject to the command of the Lord's will. He who believes in the name becomes victorious. They've given away their finest Kashmiri shawls, jewels, cows, horses, elephants, sacks of gold coins. Jinda doesn't own as much as the other queens. She came to her marriage empty-handed and has never cared to cajole gifts from her husband. But she too has gifted a triple-stranded gold necklace to the Jagannath temple, hoping for the recovery of the Sarkar, as his people lovingly call him. She kneels on the marble floor, grateful for the stone's coolness, and rests her head against the carved gold bedpost. As the Maharaja's youngest wife and his favorite, she's allowed certain liberties. The other women sit straight-spined, palms joined stiffly. Some of them send her cutting glances from under their veils. She doesn't care. It's stuffy in this room with too much whispering, too many people, Hindustani wives, European physicians, the senior courtiers, servants, priests, banka pullers, and of course the wives, covered from head to foot as custom dictates. Above her head, the canopy bears down a solid sheet of beaten gold. It oppresses her. Surely it oppresses the Maharaja too. He'd prefer to lie on the roof, she knows, in sight of the stars, as was his pleasure on summer nights. He'd breathe better there in the open, with the city which he conquered and made his own, stretching out beneath him. The intricate, beloved tapestry of Lahore, city of myth, fashioned from the wilderness before time began by love, son of Ram. But to whom can she say this? Who will listen to her? The power she possessed even a few days ago as the Sarkar's favorite queen has faded. So it's a moment of great transition in Maharani Jinda's life, and how she deals with it will make her the woman she's going to become. And I wanted to point out that this beautiful inner cover of The Last Queen, of course, has the painting as the outer cover. You showed that. But it's so nice that HarperCollins has put Maharaja Ranjit Singh's sword
This is
in
the
here.
hardcover, yeah.
That becomes an important part of the story as well.
True. So let me tell you which is my first part,
Yes.
favorite part, and then we'll open it to questions. My favorite part is when the Logans come for dinner. And Maharan and I love that because I think that in some ways it is she goes to London. She's been reunited with her son 13 years later. Chosen to go into a place that is definitely sort of I'm not saying violates everything, so essentially is against every odd that she possesses. So she is, and she comes from a land of sight and color and sound and everything, and there she is in drab England, colonizers, this thing which she completely would hate. And she's got the Logans who sort of have adopted her son and have more claim over him than her.
Yeah, they took her son away.
And
they took him away from her.
Exactly. And he trusts them more. He knows them more. They know him now. They molded. He's their son. I mean, he may be a biological son, but he's their son in everything else. So I find I know how difficult that must be for her. And then she sort of invites them for dinner. And I love the bit. Can you read the bit where she tells him,
let me see. Let me try to find that part. Do you have the page number?
I'm glad I never poised. I'm glad I will tell you. It is page 313, where the Logan, and it's right at the, 312, and right at the end. Can you see that?
Yes.
When the Logans come for dinner, I dress in my best salwar kameez.
Yes. When the Logans come for dinner, I dress in my best salwar kameez and wear my emeralds. Our cooks would like to show off their skills by making elaborate Badshahi dishes, biryani and parathas and chicken kurma, but Dalip asks them to keep the menu simple. Lady Logan's stomach is rather sensitive, he informs us. I have redone the living room in Hindustani style, replacing the bulky furniture with a Persian carpet and silken cushions. Many items from my country are easily available in London, though they are of middling qualities and criminally expensive. We invite the Logans to join us on the carpet. I'm pleased to see Dalip sitting cross-legged with no discomfort. The Logans fidget as they perch on the cushions, trying to make polite conversation. Finally, at dinner time, I take pity on them and ask the servants to serve our meal at the table. I feel particularly virtuous because I resisted my baser impulses and told my cook to make the food blander than usual because she really wanted to like torture them with extra spicy food. And then, they have a conversation and Logan is being very, I don't know, very, what would you say? He's being very
he's being very kind and says he thinks it's all right, but of course completely culturally inappropriate.
Culturally inappropriate. He's really looking down at her. He's kind of infantilizing her. He doesn't even think that she has any brain, and so she swallows her anger. I swallow my anger because she knows her son loves him and she doesn't want to create a problem, but she can't resist. And I love this. This was a happy moment for me. I swallow my anger.
This was my favorite.
And thank Logan in Urdu for procuring this house for us and for getting my jewelry out of customs and for having taken such good care of my son when I was unable to be there for him. So there's a sting right there. Why was she unable to be there for him? Because the British took her away and imprisoned her. I add, you are such a kind man, Lord Logan. I am glad that my plot to poison you when you were in Fatehgarh failed. I take pleasure in the look on Logan's face. His hand stopped halfway to his mouth. It's not that the information is new to him. It hadn't been much of a plot. My resources, I was in Shikapura Killa by then, that's the first prison they put her in, guarded day and night. My heart broken at my separation from Dalip had been meager. Deep down, I'd had no expectation that it would succeed, but I'd felt impelled to try. I could not just give up without a fight. And now, years later, she has this little victory. Logan had learned of the botched plot almost immediately when my agent was put to death. But I think he's shocked that I'm so brazenly open about my misdeeds. He looks suspiciously at the food on his plate. Beside him, Lady Logan, whom I dislike even more than her husband, because when she came into the house, she kissed him on both cheeks and called him my boy, blanches and pushes her plate away. I laugh and reassure them that I would never kill
I think that's
my house. But she's willing to kill them in other places.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that really captures the whole aspect of that. I mean, I love that. I love that when she wears the scene. And yeah, I think that's really my favorite part.
Thank you. It shows her spirit, right?
Like,
it shows her spirit.
Yeah,
because by this time, she's really in bad health.
Devious.
Yeah. She's really in bad health. She's, as you pointed out, in a place that she hates. She hates being in this place. She has very little agency, but she's going to use the agency she has.
Maybe we can take questions. Do you want to read them?
Yeah, we can take questions in right now.
Do you want to read them? Some questions?
Yeah, we do have questions. So I think one of the questions was about, can you shed light about Mangla and the historicity of it? I seem to remember that, and I will go down and scroll and see.
And further up, I think there's most British writers raise questions about her character. Ma'am, what is your perception?
Okay.
Of her relationship with Lal Singh?
Yeah.
So the first question about Mangla, she's certainly a historical character. Now we only know about Mangla in her public roles, you know, what influence she had in the court, how she was the keeper of the seal, etc., etc.
Most British writers.
I'm sorry, you're breaking up.
Okay.
And shall I continue with?
Yeah, I know. I'm so sorry. Can maybe if I switch off my video for a second, can you hear me now better?
Yes, much better. Yes.
Yeah, so I think it was my video. So just give me a second. I'll just pause my video and everybody can hear my voice, but not see my face, which is fine. Yeah, so you talked about Bangla being a historic character and this thing of British seat. I seem to remember reading a piece about how she was also a slave girl that rises to this thing to Ranjit Singh, and then he sort of gets her in that. But she is a historical character. I think
Yes.
in another talk you talked about that this thing. Then the other question is about what do you think about Lal Singh and the British thing. Can you respond to that?
Yes.
And then I've got another one. Yeah.
Yes. So in my research, as you said, I found out that Mangla was a character, and there's, her public role is known quite well, that she rose to become a great favorite. She was the keeper of the seal for a while, and that she was Jawhar's lover. So I took those things and I used them, and she was always, it was clearly seen that she was always very, very, very loyal to Rani Jindan. But the things that I used my imagination on is what kinds of conversations would they have had when they were by themselves inside the zenana, or in Rani Jinda's rooms. How would she have felt towards baby Dalip, and all of those things, those private moments which are very special, which humanize these characters. Those are the things that I made up. And it's the same with the story of Raja Lal Singh. In all of my research, his name came up over and over, and it was clear that he and Maharani Jinda had a relationship. He was her lover. It did make the Sikhs in the court very angry. And there was, again, the private moments are not known. And therefore, those are the moments that I spent a lot of emotional and imaginative love on. I embellished those, and I imagined things like, okay, how would they meet? What would Dalip Singh think of this man who's come into his mother's life? What might he want out of that relationship? And how might she feel that conflict between falling in love very deeply? And she's been alone for a long time since Maharaja Ranjit Singh died, and she sees her life stretching ahead of her, and she falls in love. And yet she can't do much about it. She's not allowed to marry him. He offers to take her away, but she knows that she can't abandon Dalip to this court. She can't give up being Queen Regent because she's the only protection he has. So, those inner moments I created. The outer outline of the story, the public outline of the story, is historical. And the saddest thing I think is that when she finally turns down Raja Lal Singh, she's not going to marry him, she's not going to run away with him. He turns against her, and he becomes one of the, the main traitor, who, at least one of the two main traitors, who caused the defeat of the First Anglo-Sikh War, which, otherwise would not have been lost. It's such a, that was like a real thorn in my heart when I read that.
Yeah, and they say, what is it? Watch out for this thing, scorned, what was it now? The fury of
woman scorned.
Woman scorned. See, right? And there it is, a man betrayed. Okay, now, so now Sada Kaur was Maharani Mehtab Kaur's mother. So did she have an influence on Jindan Kaur's life?
Say that again. I missed.
I think you want they never met. It's Sada Kaur was Maharani Mehtab Kaur's mother. So did she have an influence on Jind Kaur's life? I think you mentioned that. Right?
Yes, yes. She never meets. She's dead already. She never meets. But Maharaja Ranjit Singh remembers her very fondly, and with some guilt as well. And he tells Jinda the story of Sada Kaur, and then Sada Kaur is going to become a really imaginative influence in the life of Maharani Jinda. So the wonderful thing is that we know that Maharaja Ranjit Singh and Maharani Jindan spent a lot of time together, and they discussed a lot of things, because later she, when she is Queen Regent, she, as it were, channels his intelligence, and she makes some very good early decisions about how to keep the British in their place. So, I think Sada Kaur becomes an influence through Maharaja Ranjit Singh in Maharani Jindan's life.
Okay. Did she ever interact with Sir Henry Lawrence? Throw some light, please.
Yes, he was right there. He was the resident of the Killa. She hated him probably as much as she hated any of the British, and he would, he kind of took over. He was in keeping with the British policy of that time. His job was to break the spirit of the people. So first of all, of course, he divided the court. He rewarded some people. The traitors, he rewarded the traitors, and he punished the others. He punished the Khalsa army hugely. They were banished outside of Lahore. They could not even come into Lahore. Many of them had to give up their swords. And I'll give you just one example, which is in the book, that when he comes after the battle is lost, and he comes to Lahore Killa, he insists that everybody go down to the gate to meet him and welcome him in, which is so disrespectful. Like, he makes Dalip Singh go down there to greet him and bring him in as though he's the real leader, he's the real king, and these are all subordinates. So yes, she hates him a lot. She goes against him as many times as she can, but ultimately, he wins the cruelest victory over her, because he realizes what will break her spirit, and he pretends that he's taking Maharaja Dalip Singh for a day's journey, just a little outing, to see the parrots, in the gardens. And as soon as Dalip is gone, and so she just says, bye-bye, see you in the evening. And as soon as he's gone, he forcibly puts her in a closed carriage, and off she is sent to Shekhapura prison. And she doesn't see her son for like 14 years. So yeah, he had a big influence on her life. Big enemy of hers.
So your description of the palace when Jinda spends her first night after marriage is intriguing. How much of that is history?
Yeah. So are you talking about the... I will talk about two things. So the first
you're talking about the first night, I think.
In the zenana?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll talk about two things.
No, when she goes to him. Yeah, I think when she goes to him in the first night, she wears the maroon ghagra. I think that's what they're referring to. I'm not sure.
Okay,
but that's what it is. When she first sees him after being sort of away from him, from the zenana. I think that's what they're referring to.
So, the geography is historically accurate, because that was the building that Maharaja Ranjit Singh loved and often spent his time and his nights, the Sheesh Mahal, which is just beautiful. And thanks to the photographs I was able to see, including some historical photographs and paintings of the Lahore Killa, I had a visual, I could visualize it in my imagination. So that part is correct. Now, what they say to each other or what happens that first night, obviously I imagined it based on my understanding of these characters. And based on the fact that, he was an older man, she is a young woman, okay, let's say that the three-letter word, how would the sex have been between them? And again, I wanted to not shy away from the scenes of sex between them, because that was an important part of their lives. And I think there's a tendency in probably all cultures, but certainly in our culture, to not speak about women and sex except in very derogatory terms. And again, if a woman has sex or enjoys sex, she's the Messalina of the Punjab. but I wanted to show that filial closeness, the romance, that love between them, and how he is so gentle towards her. I thought that was really very, he's always very gentle. He's always very loving towards her. And later she will have a lot of influence over him. She'll be like, no, you can't drink wine. It's making you sick. And he will allow her to, rule over him in those aspects. So I wanted to bring out the sweetness of their relationship.
Just a moment. I'm unmuting Mandira. She's been muted.
Somebody's even asked whether you're going to write your memoir because they're really interested in seeing your journey.
Yes, that was going to be my next question. Sorry, I got muted. I got bumped off and back again. So yeah, when are you writing your memoir?
Fun question. That's a fun question. The reason I became a fiction writer, not a non-fiction writer, is so that I wouldn't have to deal with the truths of my life, which, let's face it, my life is not anywhere as exciting as Maharani Jindan's. And I'm perfectly happy with that, because otherwise I would have no time and energy to write. So probably not for a long, long time.
Yeah, I think there's another question about Rani Lakshmi Bai, whether you write about Rani Lakshmi Bai, but you are writing, I think your next novel, as you said, is likely to be set in British India.
It is, but it is, it's at the other end of this arc. So the loss of the kingdom of Punjab is a real, it's a real blow against India and Indians. And it's relatively early in the British occupation of India. But what I'm interested now in seeing how that story ends. So I'm researching a novel based right around independence, which was at once a wonderful and amazing event, but also very painful because of the partition and all the violence that happened. And so, that's what I'm interested in. So that'll give me a sense of a completed arc, the early part where the British took the kingdom away, and in the end where Indians claim back their land.
And when we fought back for it. 1 second. I think, are there any more questions? Let me check. I'm trying to see. I think there's somebody talking about there's no reference to the dead mouse. Which I think is what they refer to as.
Well, yeah. So the dead mouse, there are just little hints that the older queens in the zenana, there's more than little hints that they were very negative towards Jinda. They were very jealous of Jinda, and they tried to harm her. Now, we don't have any particulars about how they tried to harm her. So, but I took that little bit of information and I created more of, I created scenes in my imagination. I know that the major queens were the ones who were most against Maharani Jinda, and, understandably, it was their power that was most threatened. And Maharaja Ranjit Singh's main wife, Maina King, the mother of his heir, was particularly upset about Jinda's rising power. So I have to say that scene is one that I imagined, where she's given poisoned food. Although there are stories of others who were poisoned in the zenana. So I took those things together and I created that scene, which I thought was actually quite exciting and scary, where she comes and she's put in the worst room in the zenana, and she's given this plate of food has been kept there for her. And when she gives bakshish to the woman who's shown her in, I think that woman feels bad and she says, don't eat that food. And that's all she knows. She never really knows. And later she finds a dead mouse. Okay, was she poisoned, or was there an attempt to poison her? I think so. I think she thinks so. Mangala definitely thinks so, but it's never clarified 100%, which is, I know I wanted to leave that for the reader to judge and kind of weigh.
I think there's some problem with Mandira's internet.
No, I can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Maybe we
switched off my
should
video because I think that there is some
Mandira, take
problem
the
with that.
last question and then we can wrap.
Yeah.
Okay.
So how does Jinda accommodate Moran?
How does Jinda accommodate Moran? Well, Moran is actually just a little bit before Jinda's time. She sees her, but she's not yet, she's not yet a queen. She's nowhere near being a queen. She sees her on the first night when she is invited by Maharaja Ranjit Singh. He's showing interest in her, but she has no idea where this interest will go. And they're at this beautiful mehfil where the women all sit in the women's section behind Parda, but they can see everything that's going on. And she sees Moran, and then Gooden tells her Moran's story, right? She tells her, in fact, Moran, I think, and it's a story, it's a cautionary tale that Gooden tells Jinda, as she will tell her many other tales, saying, look, don't think that just because Maharaja Ranjit Singh is showing you favor today, that he will love you always. But Jinda's life will prove otherwise. And what I wanted to do by bringing in the story of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's other women, including his other queens and his concubines, was that Jinda was really special in his life. He gave her the respect and love that he really didn't give the others. The others were beautiful. He was enamored of them for a while, but it was Jinda's intelligence, her intelligence and her straightforwardness. She never lied to him. That made her special. That made her, she was probably not as beautiful. She was beautiful, but maybe not as beautiful as Moran. But, she had something more. She had something more precious that Maharaja Ranjit Singh saw. And that is what he fell in love with.
So at that note, I think it's also wonderful. It's also strange. I've been thinking about it. You have Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who has certain, but this is something that comes in your book where you talk about his relationship with women and all the people he's married them. It's not, he hasn't sort of, it's sort of legally and very much in the open, but he has a long list of women who are his consorts in some ways. You talk about when the Sati happens, they have 11 Ranis who sort of commit Sati. And interestingly, when you think, but yet the great love story is Jinda and Maharaja Ranjit Singh. And in some ways, the biggest love story that we all grew up with is Shah Jahan and Mumtaz, who's also, she's had his 17th child and she dies of childbirth, but we sort of do this thing, and there's still this remarkable love story that we talk about. And that's interesting that, you can, it's very optimistic, and it's wonderful to end on this sort of optimistic thing where love all. So yeah, thank you so much for this thing. Thank you so much for the book, much for Preeti.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one last thing about the love story. Mandira, I just wanted to add something, that yes, we have all of those love stories, but in most of them, the women are dependent on their powerful husbands, and Jinda is one of the few that after the death of her husband is when she becomes the most powerful and she wields the most power over the kingdom.
Yeah, Jinda is completely different. I'm just talking, this thing, and she's a woman who is, it's amazing that we don't sort of talk much more about her. She should be right there, up there, list of powerful women, and we kind of just ignore her. She's wonderful, and thank you for bringing her alive.
Thank you. Thank you so much for reading. And thanks to all our audience for joining us, especially at this challenging time. And I hope that you will find much relief and succor and strength in books as we go through, hopefully this last burst of the pandemic.
Arvindaji, if you can please take.
Yeah, so true. Chitraji, I don't have words to express my feelings of thanks and gratitude for such a beautiful and wonderful insight about Maharani Jindan. I think probably Jindan is alive even today in the contemporary fairer sex, which goes to the same, in the patriarchal society. But the courage she could show in those times is really exemplary. And I said in the initial part that we have so many good fans of your writings. So it'll be an honor to have you over here in Amritsar. And before I propose a vote of thanks and say something, ask Preeti to share something about the coming sessions, I would just like to conclude Maharani Jindan. I haven't read your novel as yet, but then a few lines on her, that surkh libas, that's, the libas is the attire of a queen. Surkh libas ki taab tale kuch aahein, kuch ummeedein, kuch zahir, कुछ पोशीदा, गुंजों के रंग और मंजरे खिजा, वक्त दर वक्त आहिस्ता आहिस्ता, एहसास भी जज्बात भी, कुछ रौंदे हुए कुछ मसले हुए, कपड़ों पे सिलवटों की मानंद, जिस्म पे गमों को ओढ़े हुए, वो बेखबर या वो बाखबर, कुछ जाहिर कुछ पोशीदा. But I think probably we couldn't have known Jindan like you have shown us today through your writings. Thank you so very much. And over to Preeti ji.
Thanks very much.
Lovely, lovely. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Arvinda. We've already had Anita Anand speak to us. We've also had Fakir Ejazuddin speak to us about, his family. And having you here today is sort of, just adding layers to this wonderful story of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's court and Lahore and Rani Jindan, of course, and this whole Mora story, because that is so close to Amritsar, this place where we visit and we remember and we see the old road going to Lahore. It is all really wonderful, and all of it has come alive today in this conversation that Mandira and you have had.
If I might say one thing, Amritsar itself becomes very important in Maharani Jindan's life. She escapes to Amritsar at a time when Sher Singh is getting too interested in her. So that city and seeing the Golden Temple, which was so important to her husband, is very healing for her at a difficult moment in her life.
So all of those reasons why this book was really important for us to do at Maja House, like I said right in the beginning, and so much of it is played out in these places. And this was the Maja region, and Lahore and Amritsar are literally twin cities, so close to each other. So even building up this, this entire, this picture of this composite culture that we all shared and the heritage that we shared is again something that Maja House is consistently been trying to do. So thank you very much for being here today. Further on, we've been thinking now that we may hold off the sessions, but we will be putting out a note regarding that. And also, whenever we do decide to put out the calendar, maybe from the middle of the next month or something like that, but we'll be in touch regarding all of that. So I won't say anything about the forthcoming sessions right now, but we will definitely be in touch soon regarding all of that. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Mandira. Thank you, Chitra. And thank you,
Ji.
Thank you. It
was Thank you. This was a real pleasure. Thank you, Mandira, for your great questions in spite of the internet hassles.
I'm so sorry. It's just one of those days. Okay.
Yes.
The internet has to fail you. Okay, like everything else.
I know. Every time we feel
And all of you must order, because I'm already seeing lots of people who are saying that they're going to be ordering the book. So get on Amazon and do it right away.
Even though it's
Bye.
not essential, even though books are not essential, though they should be.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They should. They heal us. They heal us. They feed us. Right? They are
Only
as
essential
nourishing.
Only essential in Kerala. In the up north, they don't expect you to read.
I don't know. Bengal has a big book reading culture.
True, but I don't think it's an essential product. I don't think Amazon is delivering at the moment. Maybe it is. Actually, in Bengal, nothing's happening, right? It's
They
not
are
even that.
delivering.
Right now,
That's-
Bengal is
okay.
really suffering. Bengal
Couriers
is
are
really
working.
We are not getting any.
I got mine even yesterday. Not this book, but another one.
Yes.
So, I mean, just go ahead and do it whenever. If not now, in the next few weeks.
Okay, ours is saying essential. Yeah, please order, please order.
All right.
Books are essential. Books are essential. They,
Absolutely.
I don't know, they nourish the soul. What can I say? If I had to live in a world without books, I don't know what I would do. I'd probably just die.
Anila is saying over here that no, Delhi has moved books to essentials again. So I guess it has. Anyway, I just got one yesterday. So, okay. Thank you very
All
much.
the best to people. All the best to all of
See
you
you.
as you go through this.
Thank you, Chitra. Wish you a
final
good day
stage.
and good night to the rest of the people of the world. Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night
Thank
to everyone.
you. Have a good day. Take care. Good night.
Bye. Good night.